All right. I got the 42-inch LG C3 monitor in for review today, guys, because a lot of people were asking me to review it, and in the past, the 42-inch LG C2 was much beloved by the tech community. And the question is the LG C3 worth upgrading to or buying today, or is it hot trash? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. First, let's start off by talking about the specs. This is a 3840 by 2160 120 Hz 42-inch 16:9 WOLED panel from LG, which does support G-Sync and FreeSync technology. So on paper, I think the size is great. I think OLED is a great technology, and there's a lot of reasons as to why you might be chubbing out over this monitor. But what about this stand? Well, let's be honest, it's awful. But moving on to the ports, it has 3 USB, 1 headphone jack, 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, which is absolutely fantastic, a LAN optical out RS-232C antenna, and an IR blaster. So there's a lot of connectivity on this, and in terms of VESA mount, you do have to adapt it if you want to actually mount it on some sort of an arm. Now, as for the price, it has actually dropped down to $1,200, making it more reasonable, although that is more expensive than the 27-inch 240 Hz OLEDs that can be regularly had for around $999. So it better be pretty good. And is it? Well, let's first talk about the color. And honestly, after using quantum dot OLEDs for a long time, I gotta say, going back to WOLED, especially considering this is a year-old Evo technology in their 42-inch model, it's just not that impressive, at least in HDR. I think it's fine in SDR, but in HDR, where WOLED does seem to struggle a bit more than quantum dot OLED, it just seems a bit more washed out and maybe not as vibrant as I'd like to see. And that's not because the Samsung displays are way oversaturated. I'm talking about calibrated versus calibrated. WOLED, especially last year's technology, is just way behind the current quantum dot OLED technology we can find on the monitors and TVs. But what about the actual accuracy? Well, taking a look here at the calibration, we can see out of the box in SDR, it definitely was fairly off, although thankfully I was able to calibrate it pretty well to match the EOTF curve and get a good RGB balance. By the way, if you do want all my settings and ICC profiles, those will be linked in my Patreon in the description below, so I do highly suggest going ahead and taking a look at that, and I do appreciate it as well, as it should make your display look a lot better. But what about HDR? And here it is kind of a mess out of the box. Not only does it not track the EOTF curve well at all, but the RGB balance is also way off. It's just way too cool. Now, thankfully, once again, I was able to do a pretty good job of getting that corrected, where it was almost perfectly matching the EOTF, and the RGB balance was, for the most part, pretty good. But what about the color volume? And here in SDR, pretty good, 167% roughly BT709, around 112% DCI-P3, and around 75% BT2020. However, in HDR, there's something wrong. Now, I'm not entirely sure if it's the software or if it's the TV itself, but I could not get it to give me good color volume results when HDR was enabled. So I'm not sure what's going on there, and I honestly don't want to say for sure whether or not it's good or bad, because again, this could just be some sort of an error. But let's go ahead and move on to the brightness, and in a 100% window in HDR, unfortunately, the LG C3 42-inch is the dimmest OLED I have ever reviewed once it has been calibrated to the D65 white point. Now, out of the box, it'll be a little bit brighter, but even then, it's still far behind the MLA and quantum dot OLEDs that are the other options that you could have for a monitor. And it doesn't fare too much better in a 10% window, where 660 nits is all right, but it's just not very impressive in the year of 2023. Now, moving on to games, again, not very impressive, 673 nits for peak brightness in Battlefield 1. That's all right, it's middle of the pack, but guys, I want you to take a look at the S95C, which is also an OLED TV, although of course it is a little bit larger. But that being said, it's significantly brighter out of the box, nearly twice as bright, and it's actually nearly 3 times as bright if you go ahead and do some tinkering in the display. So it just goes to show how far behind LG's last generation panels are when compared to the newest stuff we have available. And honestly, I really do think they should have put an MLA panel on this 42-inch version. It's a real shame they didn't, and it is showing in these tests. Now, in terms of minimum brightness, of course, it does give you 0 nits, which is fantastic, giving you a contrast ratio that's actually infinite. And in terms of total system latency, it's pretty decent at 34.3 milliseconds, which is roughly where I'd expect a fast 120Hz OLED to land in my charts. But what about the actual motion performance? And here it's actually pretty good. We can see at 120Hz and 100Hz, it does look pretty good, although it does start to get fairly blurry at 60Hz, but that's nothing out of the ordinary and certainly is a lot better than what you would see on an LCD. In fact, even the 240Hz LCD on the right there, you can see has a bunch of black level smearing because of its, I believe, VA panel, whereas this LG OLED has essentially none. But then let's go ahead and take a look at the text clarity. And here at 4K, WOLED doesn't have as many problems. It does look a lot more clear, but you can see that there definitely is some fringing going on. And to be honest with you guys, I do think this is actually somewhat significantly worse than what you would find on the latest generation of quantum dot OLEDs. I think the new pixel arrangement from the 2023 quantum dot OLEDs is a major improvement over their last generation stuff, and it actually does look cleaner than the WOLED stuff like we see in the 42-inch LG C3. Now, in terms of the finish, it's actually probably the best finish I have ever seen on any display yet. Not only is it a premium glossy finish, but it also doesn't have any of the weird magenta tinting issues that you get when the light is put in front of it, like you see on quantum dot OLED, which makes it a fantastic finish to use for a TV, and the perceived clarity because of it is absolutely amazing. Now, the viewing angles, because it's an OLED, are also pretty good. However, WOLED definitely has an issue with viewing angles and uniformity that gives it this weird pink tint closer to the center and a more of a green tint on the sides if you pull up a full white image. And that is something that honestly is a major issue for these displays, and one of the reasons as to why I'm going to tell you guys that honestly I think it's too expensive to be buying this display right now. There's a lot of things to like about the LG C3, but frankly, it's not too much of an improvement over the LG C2, and it's significantly more expensive while still having all of the same issues, such as the viewing angle and uniformity, problems with the pink or magenta tinting, as some people like to call it, that we've had for years with these LG panels, and with the much lower brightness than what we get out of quantum dot OLED and even MLA OLED panels, at least on the TVs, it just doesn't really make sense, in my opinion, to be spending $1,200+ on this display in 2023. Now, if it drops in price, things could definitely change, as I do believe the LG C3 is an improvement over the C2 in general brightness. However, again, in every other aspect, there's not a lot of improvements unless you want to get really technical about stuff. And quite frankly, guys, the only thing that I really care about is the general viewing experience. And here, it's just not too much better than the C2. So I think if you're in the market for one of these TVs, you're better off going with the C2 or stretching your budget and size that you're willing to deal with to go for the S95C, as the S95C as a PC monitor absolutely blows the LG C3 out of the water. Not only can it get up to nearly 3 times as bright, but it also has far better color, especially in HDR, and it also has a 144Hz refresh rate, which I consider to be the sweet spot, and you can feel the difference between 144 and 120 if you're doing PC gaming. So there you have it, guys. I actually don't recommend this monitor right now, but hopefully it drops in price and becomes a good option in the future. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.